Hello students, I welcome you all to today's session. I hope all of you are doing good. Today's topic is Nationalist Movement. Learning topics: early political associations, Parliamentary reforms 1909, Indian National Congress, the revolutionaries, the moderate phase, Mahatma Gandhi arises on the national scene, rise of extremism, Montague Chelmsford reforms 1919, case study partition of Bengal, the Rowlatt Act, the moderates extremist differences, the Jallianwala Bagh massacre 1919, formation of Muslim League 1906, case study. In the previous chapters, we have studied the advent of the British in India, how they conquered territories and took over kingdoms. They introduced new laws and changed the existing administrative and educational systems. They even tried to bring in social and religious reforms. However, traditional arts and crafts declined under the British. Farmers and peasants also suffered under them. Some of the changes were favorable to the Indians. Nevertheless, a majority of these changes were brought about to help the British and were not very helpful to Indians. तो अभी तक हमने पढ़ा था किस तरीके से ब्रिटिशर्स हमारी कंट्री में आए, किंगडम्स को हराया, वहां पे रूल करा और किस तरीके से एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव कंडीशन ही पूरी कंट्री की पलट कर रही. After the revolt of 1857, there was a sense of outrage at the cruel way it was put down. This feeling of dissatisfaction increased during 1870 to 1880. Indians realized that India was one country and it belonged to all the people irrespective of caste, color, class, creed, language or gender. This led to the realization that the British were the outsiders but controlled the resources and the lives of people of India. Indians needed to control their own destiny and the destiny of India. Thus, the feeling of nationalism emerged amongst the Indians. तो 1800s के बाद से ही करीबन 1880 तक लोगों में ये भावना जाग चुकी थी कि ये हमारा देश है और हमारे देश पे बाहर का कोई आकर राज कर रहा है और इसे जल्द से जल्द यहाँ से हटाना होगा. One of the major factors for the rise of nationalism in India was the economic exploitation of Indians. The British drained away the wealth of India by a well laid out policy which antagonized most Indians. Artisans and peasants suffered the most. Besides this, the exposure to Western education made India aware of revolutions occurring in France and America, from where they got ideas, and now they wanted such a thing happening in their country. Development of transport and communication indirectly prompted unity and brought India closer, especially the introduction of railways. The growth of the press and nationalist literature instilled a sense of patriotism among people. It also disseminated ideas such as nationalism, democracy, socialism, liberty and fraternity. तो नेशनलिज्म बिल्कुल अपने पीक पे था, लोगों को रियलाइज होना स्टार्ट हो चुका था कि ये हमारा देश है, हमारे ऊपर हमारे ही रिसोर्सेज को यूज करके दूसरा कोई राज नहीं कर सकता. और प्रेस की मदद से, मीडिया की मदद से फ्रांस, अमेरिका जैसी कंट्रीज में क्या क्या चीजें हो रही थी, उनसे आइडियाज लेके इंडिया में भी ये फ्रीडम का स्ट्रगल स्टार्ट होने वाला था. क्विक फैक्ट्स: इन 1867 दादा भाई नौरोजी पुट फॉरवर्ड द आइडिया दैट ब्रिटेन was draining India. According to him, the main cause of India's poverty was the way the British were spoiling Indian resources and further draining them out to England. He found that the colonial economic laws only sought to destroy India. He further said that the draining of Indian resources had reduced India to a land of famines that were more frequent, more widespread and more fatal than any known before in the history of India or of the world. तो सबसे पहले दादा भाई नौरोजी ने ही आइडेंटिफाई करा था कि ब्रिटिशर्स हमारी कंट्री में आके सारा का सारा वेल्थ अपने देश में पहुंचा रहे हैं और हमारी कंट्री में कुछ भी नहीं बच रहा है. Another prominent Congress leader, Ramesh Chandra Dutt, made the drain the major theme of his economic history of India. तो दूसरे जो प्रोमिनेंट कांग्रेस लीडर थे जिनका नाम था रमेश चंद्र, उन्होंने भी अपनी अलग अलग थीम्स में यही बताया है किस तरीके से ब्रिटिशर्स आए और हमारी सारी संपत्ति को साथ लेके चले गए. Early political associations. Many political associations were formed in various parts of the country before the formation of Indian National Congress in 1885. These were the Indian Association founded by Surendranath Banerjee in 1851, the Bombay Association 1852, Madras Native Association 1852, founded by G. Subramanya Iyer and Anand Charlu. Pune Sarvajanik Sabha 1870, founded by Justice Ranade, and the Bombay Presidency Association 1885, established by Firoz Shah Mehta and Badruddin Tayyabji. तो इंडियन नेशनल कांग्रेस के फॉर्मेशन से पहले भी इंडिया में काफ़ी सारी अलग अलग सिटीज़ या स्टेट्स में अलग अलग फॉर्मेशंस हो चुकी थी. However, these associations had a localized and limited participation. Soon the need was felt for an all-India political organization. The credit for giving a concrete and final shape to this political organization named Indian National Congress goes to a retired English civil servant A.O. Hume. तो ये सारी जो localized associations थी ये छोटी छोटी थी, बहुत ज़्यादा इसमें पार्टिसिपेशन नहीं था, इसीलिए फाइनली एक इंग्लिश सर्विसमैन जिनका नाम है A.O. Hume, उन्होंने इंडियन नेशनल कांग्रेस की स्थापना करी। इंडियन नेशनल कांग्रेस, ड्यू टू A.O. Hume's efforts and with the support of Indian leaders such as Dada Bhai Naroji, Firoz Shah Mehta, Surendranath Banerjee, Badruddin Tayyibji, the Indian National Congress was founded in December 1885. Its first session was held at Mumbai in December 1885 under the presidency of W.C. Banerjee. तो A.O. Humes और बाकी सारे लीडर्स जिसमें कि सुरेंद्रनाथ बैनर्जी, फिरोज शाह मेहता जैसे लोग शामिल थे, उनकी मदद से इंडियन नेशनल कांग्रेस की स्थापना करी गई और सबसे पहले दिसंबर 1885 में बॉम्बे में ही W.C. बैनर्जी के प्रेसिडेंसी के अंडर इसको पहला सेशन निकाला गया। The moderate phase. The national leaders like Dada Bhai Naroji, P.N. Mehta, D.E. Vakha, W.C. Banerjee, S.N. Banerjee, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, who dominated Congress policies during this time, believed in liberalism and moderate politics and came to be known as moderates. They all believed in constitutional methods and favored the policy of protest, prayer and petition. तो ये सारे लोग मॉडरेट फेज के थे, यानी कि इनको ज़्यादा लड़ाई झगड़े में इनका भरोसा नहीं था। इनका मानना था कि सॉफ्ट पॉलिसी से बिना लड़ाई झगड़े के भी हम आज़ादी पा सकते हैं। The chief aims of the Indian National Congress (INC) were 1. To promote and consolidate the feeling of national unity, 2. To present popular demands before the government, 3. To bring together leaders from different parts of the country, 4. To remove racial, religious and caste prejudices, 5. To create public opinion in the country. तो INC के कुछ मेन एक एम थे जो वो अचीव करना चाहते थे। सबसे पहले नेशनल यूनिटी, यानी कि सब में एकता की भावना आए, जितने भी गवर्नमेंट इंस्टीट्यूशंस ब्रिटिशर्स के द्वारा बनाए गए हैं उनको हटा दिया जाए, बॉयकॉट कर दिया जाए, जितने भी अलग अलग रीजनल लीडर्स हैं उनको असिमुलेट करा जाए, एक साथ लेकर आया जाए और एक कॉमन एम नेशनलिज्म की तरफ बढ़ावा दिया जाए। Rise of extremism. Soon the extremists became important in the Congress. The extremists were led by Lala Lajpat Rai, Bal Gangadhar Tilak and Bipin Chandra Pal, popularly known as Lal Bal Pal. Another extremist leader was Aurobindo Ghosh. These leaders opposed British rule very strongly. उसके बाद इंडियन नेशनल कांग्रेस में ही कुछ ऐसे लीडर्स भी थे जैसे कि लाला लाजपत राय, बाल गंगाधर तिलक एंड बिपिन चंद्र पाल, जिनको कलेक्टिवली लाल बाल पाल के नाम से भी जाना जाता है, जिनका एक्सट्रीमिस्ट पॉलिसीज में ज्यादा भरोसा था। They called for strikes, boycotts and mass demonstrations to spread political awakening and achieve political reform. Many reasons contributed to the rise of extremism within the Congress. The main among these were disappointment with the British attitude towards the Congress and Lord Curzon's decision to partition of Bengal. और एक्सट्रीमिस्ट की तादाद और भी ज़्यादा बढ़ गई क्योंकि उसी टाइम पे लॉर्ड कर्जन ने बंगाल का पार्टीशन कर दिया था और अलग अलग जो ब्रिटिशर्स रूल थे उनके अगेंस्ट में ये प्रोटेस्ट करना चाहते थे। British attitude towards the Congress. From the beginning, the British were against the Congress policy of demanding reforms. Therefore, not many reforms were introduced during the first 2 decades of the existence of the Congress. The Indian Councils Act of 1892 was a disappointment. The freedom of the press was curtailed. Indians continued to be denied basic political rights. The British officials called the nationalist leaders as disloyal babus and began to criticize the Congress and its leaders. They also tried to create a gulf between the Hindus and the Muslims by their policy of divide and rule, but the opposition of the authorities failed to check the growth of the national movement. जो ब्रिटिशर्स थे वो स्टार्टिंग से ही इंडियन नेशनल कांग्रेस के अगेंस्ट में थे क्योंकि वो जानते थे कि वो ब्रिटिशर्स को यहाँ से बाहर निकालना चाहते हैं। इसीलिए टाइम टू टाइम अपनी रिग्रेसिव पॉलिसीज, डिवाइड एंड रूल पॉलिसी जिसमें हिंदूज और मुस्लिम का बंटवारा कर दिया करते थे, इनसे ये अलग अलग सेक्शंस का भरोसा जीतते थे ताकि इंडियन नेशनल कांग्रेस अपने मकसूबों में कामयाब ना हो पाए। केस स्टडी, पार्टीशन ऑफ बंगाल. Bengal at that time was a very big province consisting of present West Bengal and East Bengal, Bangladesh. In 1905, Lord Curzon, the Viceroy of India, partitioned Bengal into West Bengal and East Bengal. East Bengal, in which the majority of the population was Muslim, was separated from the rest of Bengal. The reason given for the partition was that since Bengal was too big, it was important to divide it so as to administer it better. तो लॉर्ड कर्सन ने पार्टीशन कर दिया था बंगाल का, ईस्ट बंगाल और वेस्ट बंगाल. ईस्ट बंगाल में थे सारे के सारे मुस्लिम्स और बाकी सारे बंगालीज थे अलग. इसका रीज़न ये दिया गया कि बंगाल जो है वो बहुत बड़ा है साइज में, तो उसको एडमिनिस्टर करना मुश्किल हो रहा है, जिसकी वजह से पार्टीशन करा जा रहा है. बट एक्चुअल जो रीज़न था वो था डिवाइड एंड रूल, बंटवारा करो और राज करो. Actually, reasons for the partition were, however, different. The national movement in Bengal was very strong. The partition was a deliberate attempt to weaken the movement. The move also aimed at sowing seeds of disunity between the Hindus and the Muslims and drawing the Muslims away from the national movement. The partition of Bengal was widely criticized. All sections of the population rose up in opposition. Demonstrations and public meetings were held throughout Bengal. The Congress launched a movement to end the partition. Surendranath Banerjee, Bipin Chandra Pal, Abdul Rasool played an important part in this movement. People of all communities tied Rakhi to each other to express their solidarity and oneness. The day when the partition came into effect was observed as a day of unity and solidarity. It was also a day of mourning and no business was conducted in the entire province. The national movement, instead of weakening, became more mass-based with the rise of new ways of protest like Swadeshi and boycott. तो इनिशियली जो पार्टीशन किया गया था ये बंटवारा करने के लिए किया गया था ताकि मुस्लिम्स जो है वो इस मूवमेंट से हट जाएं, लेकिन ये उल्टा भारी पड़ गया लॉर्ड कर्जन पे ही. जितने भी लोग थे इस दिन उन्होंने एक दूसरे को राखी बांधी और भी बड़ा मास मूवमेंट हो गया ये नेशनलिज्म की तरफ. Quick facts. In 1904, H.H. Risley, Home Secretary to the Government of India, stated, "Bengal united is a power. Bengal divided will pull in several different ways." That is what the Congress leaders feel. Their apprehensions are perfectly correct and they form one of the great merits of the scheme. One of our main objects is to split up and thereby weaken a solid body of opponents to our rule. तो H.H. रिस्ले जो कि होम सेक्रेटरी थे उस टाइम पे इंडिया के, उन्होंने भी ये कहा था कि अगर आप बंगाल को डिवाइड कर देंगे तो हमारे लिए, ब्रिटिशर्स के लिए और भी ज़्यादा आसान हो जाएगा लोगों पर राज करना और नेशनलिज्म की भावना को कम करना. The Swadeshi and boycott movement. The division of Bengal gave rise to two new methods of struggle, the Swadeshi and boycott movement, which was launched to end the partition. Swadeshi literally means of one's own country. It was aimed at promotion indigenous industries by boycotting use of British goods so that Indian industries would prosper and a patriotic spirit be developed. The method of boycott focused on asking people to boycott British goods so that India was no longer treated as a dumping ground and a market for British goods. तो स्वदेशी और बॉयकॉट करा गया, यानी कि यहाँ जो इंडियन इंडिजिनस मेड प्रोडक्ट्स हैं उनका इस्तेमाल किया जाए और बाहर से जितनी भी चीजें आ रही हैं उनको बॉयकॉट कर दिया जाए. Starting from Bengal, the Swadeshi and boycott movement spread like wildfire across the country. Everyone, the rich and poor, the young and old, men and women, joined in the crusade to boycott British goods and use Indian-made goods. Shopkeepers were persuaded to stop selling British goods and instead stock Indian goods. People wearing British-made clothes were criticized openly. At some places, barbers and washermen refused to serve people using British goods. तो इतनी भारी तादाद में ये बॉयकॉट स्टार्ट हो गया था कि हर टाइप के लोगों ने ब्रिटिश गुड्स को यूज करना बंद कर दिया था. Students played a very important role in these movements. They boycotted classes and demonstrated on the streets. They dissuaded people from buying British goods. A large number of women also joined the demonstrations. Many of them faced police brutalities and even went to prison. From this time on, women began to play an active role in the national movement. The British were finally forced to annul the partition in 1911. उसके बाद अलग अलग लोगों ने डेमोन्स्ट्रेशंस भी चालू कर दी, औरतें भी एक्टिवली पार्टिसिपेट करने लग गई, काफी सारे लोग जेल भी गए और आखिरकार 1911 में पार्टीशन ऑफ बंगाल को रद्द करना पड़ा. The moderates extremist differences. The struggle against the division of Bengal had temporarily united the moderates and the extremists. However, there were differences in outlook and policies between the two, which could not be easily resolved. The moderates still thought that petitions and appeals were the best methods to demand a better administration. They wanted to use the method of boycott only in special circumstances. The extremists, on the other hand, advocated a widespread agitation. They felt that the Swadeshi and boycott movement had developed a feeling of pride and confidence among the people, and therefore they wanted an extension of the boycott movement. They advocated boycott of schools, colleges and universities. तो एक्सट्रीमिस्ट्स और मॉडरेट्स के बीच में डिफरेंसेस आ गए थे. जो मॉडरेट्स थे वो चाहते थे कि हर जगह बॉयकॉट करने की जरूरत नहीं है. ऑन द अदर हैंड जो एक्सट्रीमिस्ट थे वो चाहते थे कि अगर आप एग्रेसिवली काम नहीं करेंगे तो ब्रिटिश यहां से नहीं जाएगा. कैलकाटा सेशन ऑफ INC 1906. In 1906, the Indian National Congress held its annual session at Calcutta. Dadabhai Naoroji was the president of this session. He tried to make the moderates and the extremists agree to certain common policies. The Congress declared Swaraj or self-government as its goal. It declared that India must be governed by the elected representatives of the people. This was a big event in the national movement. उसके बाद 1906 में जो INC है उसका annual session हुआ. दादाभाई नारोजी ने इसको प्रिसाइड किया था और ये बताया था किस तरीके से स्वदेशी मूवमेंट चालू रहना चाहिए और ब्रिटिश गुड्स का बॉयकॉट कंटिन्यू होना चाहिए. Quick facts. Dadabhai Naoroji became the president of the Indian National Congress in 1856, 1893 and 1906. तो 1856, 1893 और 1906 ये 3 साल INC के प्रेसिडेंट रह चुके हैं दादाभाई नारोजी. Split in the INC Surat session 1907. The moderates and the extremists could not remain united for long. At the Congress session in 1907 at Surat, a conflict arose. This conflict was over the methods to be adopted for the attainment of Swaraj. The Congress began to be controlled by the moderates and the extremists functioned from outside. It was only in 1916 at the Lucknow session of the Congress that the two groups were again united. तो आपके जो moderates और extremists थे वो separate होने लग गए थे 1907 सूरत सेशन में अपनी अपनी अलग अलग policies की वजह से. Even after the withdrawal of the extremists from the Congress, their policies remained popular throughout the country. The British panicked at the growing popularity of the extremists and tried to suppress their movement. Lala Lajpat Rai was arrested in 1907 and deported to Burma. Bipin Chandra Pal was also imprisoned. Bal Gangadhar Tilak was arrested in 1908 and deported to Burma for 6 years. Public meetings and many newspapers were banned, but these acts failed to lessen the popularity of the extremists among the masses. तो इवन दो जो एक्सट्रीमिस्ट थे उन्होंने कांग्रेस से विड्रॉ कर लिया था, लेकिन इनकी जो पॉलिसीज थी, तरीका था नेशनलिज्म पाने का, वो काफी ज्यादा पॉपुलर था और अक्सर जो ब्रिटिशर्स थे वो इनकी पॉलिसी से घबरा भी जाते. फॉर्मेशन ऑफ मुस्लिम लीग 1906. In order to weaken the Indian national movement, the British started playing a game of divide and rule to separate the Hindus and the Muslims. This led to the formation of Muslim League in 1906. The league showed its separatist tendencies when it supported the partition of Bengal and also started requesting the British to give the Muslims a separate electorate. उसके बाद 1906 में मुस्लिम लीग का भी फॉर्मेशन हुआ. ये ब्रिटिशर्स का तरीका था डिवाइड एंड रूल का, जिसमें इन्होंने मुस्लिम्स को हिंदू से अलग कर दिया था. Morley Minto reforms 1909. Though the British intensified their policy of suppressing the extremists, they at the same time also tried to appease the moderates by announcing certain political concessions. In 1909, an act was passed based on the suggestions of the Viceroy Lord Minto and the Secretary of State for India, Morley. This act is known as Morley-Minto Reforms or the Government of India Act of 1909. तो ब्रिटिशर्स ने एक्सट्रीमिस्ट और मॉडरेट्स को अलग कर दिया था. मॉडरेट्स को प्लीज करने के लिए, अपीज करने के लिए ये दो अलग अलग टाइप के लोग साथ में आए. जो वाइसरॉय थे वो और जो दूसरे सेक्रेटरी जनरल ऑफ इंडिया थे वो भी, मॉर्ले मिंटो. कलेक्टिवली इनको मॉर्ले मिंटो कहा जाता है. ये मॉर्ले मिंटो रिफॉर्म्स या फिर इंडियन एक्ट के नाम से भी जाना जाता है. द एक्ट हैड द फॉलोइंग फीचर्स. एन इंडियन मेंबर SP सिन्हा was accepted into the Viceroy's Executive Council. The membership of the Central Legislative Council and the Provincial Legislative Councils was increased. However, less than half of the members were elected members. The elected members were not to be elected by the people but by the powerful sections of society such as landlords, zamindars and business. The act introduced a system of separate electorates for Hindu and Muslim voters. They were to elect leaders from their own communities. This was introduced to create a communal divide. तो मॉर्ले मिंटो रिफॉर्म्स में अलग अलग टाइप की फीचर्स लाए गए. इसका जो मेन फीचर था वो ये था कि इसमें सेपरेट इलेक्टोरेट थे हिंदूज के लिए और मुस्लिम्स के लिए. ये खास करके इसलिए लाए गए थे ताकि एक कम्युनल डिफरेंस पैदा हो सके. इसके तहत आपके हिंदू जो होंगे वो हिंदू लीडर को ही इलेक्ट करेंगे और मुस्लिम्स जो होंगे वो मुस्लिम लीडर्स को ही इलेक्ट करेंगे. The powers of the members of the provincial councils remained advisory. जो provincial councils की जितनी भी powers थी वो खाली advisory थी. आप advise कर सकते हैं, आपकी बातों को माना भी जा सकता है और इनकार भी किया जा सकता है. No significant improvement was introduced by these reforms. The British refused the Indian demand for Swaraj. The Congress opposed the creation of separate electorates for the Muslims. The system of separate electorates for the Muslims sowed the seeds of communalism. कुछ खास मेजर चेंजेस इसमें थे नहीं, लेकिन एक गलत काम इस फीचर ने जरूर कर दिया था. इस एक्ट का सबसे बेकार काम ये था कि इसने कम्युनल डिफरेंस पैदा कर दिया था हिंदूज और मुस्लिम्स के बीच में. Quick facts. The revolutionaries were bold enough to throw a bomb at the Viceroy Lord Hardinge when he was riding on an elephant in a procession at Delhi. The Viceroy was wounded. तो इतने सारे revolutionaries थे, इन्होंने Viceroy जब वो अपने हाथी पे बैठकर जा रहे थे तो उन पे बॉम्ब गिरा दिया था, जिसकी वजह से वो जख्मी भी हो गए थे. The revolutionaries. Apart from the moderates and the extremists, there was a group which believed in the use of violence and forced to oust British from the country. These people organized secret societies and used firearms and explosives. Most of these societies were located in Maharashtra and Bengal. तो extremists के अलावा भी कई ऐसे secret societies थी जो explosive का चीज़ों का use करते थे, firearms का use करते थे, जो खासकर आप बंगाल और महाराष्ट्र में देखेंगे. The failure of the Congress to achieve reforms and the increasingly repressive policies of the British had angered the section of society. A number of young revolutionaries advocated the use of force to overthrow British rule. These young revolutionaries copied the method of assassinations followed by the Irish and Russian revolutionaries to strike fear in the government. ये सारे जितने भी एक्सट्रीमिस्ट से हटके ये जो फायर आर्म्स और वेपन्स का यूज करा करते थे, ये आयरिश टेक्नोलॉजी का इस्तेमाल करते थे, आयरिश वे ऑफ मेथड का इस्तेमाल करा करते थे लोगों को डराने के लिए. The revolutionaries formed secret societies to train their members in the use of firearms and explosives. अभिनव भारत Society in Maharashtra and Anushilan Samiti in Bengal were two important societies that used violence and were involved in killing of several British officers. तो महाराष्ट्र और बंगाल में ऐसे काफ़ी सारे सोसाइटीज़ देखी गई हैं जो एक्सप्लोजिव और फायर आर्म्स का इस्तेमाल किया करते थे और काफ़ी सारे ब्रिटिश ऑफिसर्स को मारने में भी वो सक्षम रहे हैं. In 1908, Khudiram Bose and Prafulla Chakki, two revolutionaries from Muzaffarpur, attempted to kill a British judge by throwing a bomb at his carriage and accidentally killed two British ladies. Khudiram Bose was hanged while Prafulla Chakki shot himself dead. तो खुदीराम बोस और प्रफुल्ला चक्की ने भी ऐसे ही रेवोल्यूशनरीज रहे हैं. इन्होंने एक प्रोसेशन पे जो वहाँ ब्रिटिशर्स थे वहाँ पे बॉम्ब गिराया, जिसके कारण खुदीराम बोस को लटका के मार दिया गया और प्रफुल्ला चौकी ने खुद को ही मार दिया. In 1912, an attempt was made on the life of Viceroy Lord Hardinge. Both these attempts, however, were unsuccessful. However, the revolutionaries succeeded in killing the collectors of Nasik and Tinnavelly. तो काफ़ी सारे लॉर्ड्स को भी, जैसे लॉर्ड हैडिंग को भी इन्होंने मारने की कोशिश करी, अनसक्सेसफुल रहे, लेकिन कुछ बहुत सारे ब्रिटिश ऑफिशियल्स को भी इन्होंने मार गिराया. During this period, some other revolutionaries were also arrested, most notable being Aurobindo Ghosh. After being released, he gave up all political activities and opened his ashram at Pondicherry, modern पुडुचेरी. तो काफ़ी सारे रेवोल्यूशनरीज अरेस्ट भी हुए. पौंडीचेरी यानी कि जो पुडुचेरी है प्रेजेंट डे में, वहाँ पे भी ऐसे काफ़ी सारे रेवोल्यूशनरीज देखे गए हैं. Many of the revolutionaries left India and went abroad to places like Europe, Canada, USA, where they set up secret organizations. Others who canvassed for the cause of India's struggle were Shyamji Verma, Lala Hardyal, Madam Bhikaji Kama, V.D. Savarkar, M.N. Roy, and Raspberry Bose. They tried to gain public opinion in favor of Indians. और जेल से छूट जाने के बाद ये अलग अलग पार्ट्स ऑफ द कंट्री में या फिर वर्ल्ड में पहुंच जाते थे, वहाँ पे सीक्रेट ऑर्गेनाइजेशन फॉर्म करते थे और वहीं से ये नेशनल मूवमेंट को चलाते थे. The efforts of the revolutionaries to overthrow British rule did not succeed. Their movement was such that it could never involve the masses. Without support of the masses, their movement could not have succeeded. Yet the revolutionaries succeeded in a way. Stories of their courage spread across the country and they won the love and admiration of the people. और ब्रिटिशर्स के अगेंस्ट में बहुत सारे लोग सपोर्ट नहीं कर रहे थे, जिस वजह से जितने भी रेवोल्यूशनरीज थे उनका जो एम था वो कुछ हद तक सक्सेसफुल हो रहा था. The revolutionaries became national heroes. By their spirit of patriotism, determination and self-sacrifice, they inspired many others to join the national movement. और ये काफ़ी ज़्यादा इंस्पिरेशन के सोर्स रहे और काफ़ी सारे लोगों को इन्होंने इंस्पायर करा नेशनल मूवमेंट में पार्टिसिपेट करने के लिए. Quick facts. In 1913, Indians in United States and Canada established the Ghadar Party with the aim to liberate India from British rule. In the first issue of their paper Ghadar, one of the founder members, Lala Hardyal, wrote, "Today there begins in foreign lands, but in our country's tongue, a war against the British Raj. What is our name? Mutiny. What is our work? Mutiny. Where will mutiny break out? In India. The time will soon come when rifles and blood will take the place of pens and ink." तो सबसे पहले जो गदर पार्टी का फॉर्मेशन बाहर कंट्री में हुआ था इंडिया के फ्रीडम के लिए ही, हरदयाल ने कहा था अपने गदर पार्टी के पहले पब्लिशर में कि इंडिया का जितना भी आप अगर ब्रिटिश राज से इनको मुक्ति नहीं दी गई तो वो टाइम दूर नहीं है जब इंक और पेन रिप्लेस हो जाएगा खून खराबे से. महात्मा गांधी arises on the national scene. Towards the end of the First World War, the Indian national movement found a new leader, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. Under his leadership, the national movement became a mass movement. For his enormous influence on the people, Rabindranath Tagore called him Mahatma. उसके बाद आए मोहनदास करमचंद गांधी जिन्होंने मास मूवमेंट को इन्फ्लुएंस किया इस कॉज की तरफ, और क्योंकि इनका इन्फ्लुएंस मास मूवमेंट बहुत ही ज़्यादा था इस वजह से रविंद्रनाथ टैगोर ने इनको महात्मा का टाइटल दे दिया था. Mohandas Gandhi was born on 2nd October 1869 at Porbandar in Gujarat. His father was the Diwan of Porbandar. After receiving his early education in India, he went to England to study law. Thereafter, he went to South Africa to practice law. During his stay there, he fought against the oppression of the white rulers against the Indians living in South Africa. During the struggle, he evolved the concept of satyagraha or non-violent struggle against oppression. His concept of satyagraha was based on the two pillars of truth and non-violence. तो महात्मा गांधी जी 2 अक्टूबर को पोरबंदर में पैदा हुए थे. इंडिया में उन्होंने पढ़ाई करी, इंग्लैंड में उन्होंने लॉ की पढ़ाई करी, साउथ अफ्रीका में प्रैक्टिस करा. वहीं से उन्होंने अपने सत्याग्रह की जो जर्नी है उसे शुरू कर दिया था. Gandhiji returned to India in 1915. He travelled all over the country. He reached the conclusion that a true national struggle had to go beyond just the achievement of independence. It also had to reform society. In 1916, he founded the Sabarmati Ashram in Gujarat and welcomed people of all castes and religions to it. He also started a nationwide movement against untouchability. He called the so-called lower castes Harijans or God's children. Gandhiji also worked to review the village crafts that was made popular. Small industries were started in many villages, was popularized as a symbol of self-reliance. इंडिया में आने के बाद उन्होंने पूरा कंट्री का टूर किया और ये जाना कि सिर्फ इंडिपेंडेंस के लिए इंडिपेंडेंस ही ज़रूरी नहीं है, बल्कि एकदम छोटे छोटे ग्रास रूट लेवल से भी क्या क्या दिक्कतें हमारे देश में हो रही हैं उनको भी निकाल के बाहर फेंकना ज़रूरी है. Gandhiji's social ideology and the reforms he introduced gave strength to his political activities and made the national movement a mass movement. His first movement was launched at Champaran, Bihar in 1917. The peasants on the indigo plantations were forced to sell indigo at low prices, so fixed by the European plant. Gandhiji protested against this and forced the government to increase the price of indigo. In 1918, he led the workers of the textile mills in Ahmedabad against the mill owners. Ultimately, the mill owners had to raise the wages of the workers. He also involved himself with the peasants of Kheda, Kheda in Gujarat, and forced the government to suspend tax collection because the crops had failed that year. तो इंडिगो प्लांटर्स जो थे वो बहुत ही कम पैसे दिया करते थे फार्मर्स को और कल्टिवेटर्स को. इसके खिलाफ भी गांधी जी ने आवाज़ उठाई थी. चंपारण मूवमेंट किया, अलग अलग जगह प्रोटेस्ट करा और गवर्नमेंट को फोर्स किया कि इनकी जो वेजेस है उसे बढ़ा देना चाहिए. मोन्टाग शेल्मसफोर्ड रिफॉर्म्स 1919. The Indian leaders had supported the British in the First World War, hoping that their demands would be met after the war was over. To pacify the demands of the Congress, the British passed the Government of India Act in 1919, also known as Montague-Chelmsford Reforms, as the Act was formulated by the Secretary of State for India, Montague, and the Indian Viceroy Lord Chelmsford. The Act introduced a number of changes in the central and provincial legislatures. उसके बाद जो इंडियंस थे उन्होंने इस उम्मीद में ब्रिटिशर्स का साथ दे दिया कि वॉर खत्म होने के बाद वो उन्हीं की भलाई के लिए कुछ ना कुछ काम करेंगे, इसीलिए मोंटाग-चेम्सफोर्ड रिफॉर्म भी लागू हुआ. The Central Legislative Council was made bicameral, that is, it would consist of two houses, the Imperial Legislative Assembly and the Council of State. Elected members now formed the majority in both the houses. No significant change was made in the power of these houses. The system of diarchy or dual government was introduced in the provinces. The state subjects were divided into two, reserved and transferred. All the important subjects like finance, police, etc. were placed in the reserved list. They were under the control of the governor and his council. Relatively less important subjects from the British viewpoint like education, public health, etc. were the responsibility of ministers who were responsible to the legislature. Real power thus remained with British officials. तो मोंटाग-चेम्सफोर्ड रिफॉर्म में भी जितनी भी एक्टिविटीज़ हुई, फीचर्स आए, जैसे कि डायरकी हुई, बाई कैमरल लेजिस्लेचर हुआ, टू हाउस पार्टी हुई, लेकिन जो मेजर रूल था, मेजर पावर थी, वो हमेशा से ही ब्रिटिशर्स के पास ही रही. इस एक्ट से भी इंडियंस को कोई फायदा नहीं हुआ. क्विक फैक्ट्स. Gandhiji said, the only virtue I want to claim is truth and non-violence. Non-violence is the law of our species as violence is the law of the brute. तो हमेशा से ही गांधी जी चाहते थे कि सच्चाई और अहिंसा के ही राह पर चला जाए. The Rowlatt Act. The Government of India Act failed to satisfy the demands of Indians. Large-scale protest meetings were held all over the country. 1919, the Rowlatt Act was passed, under which the government could arrest anyone without a warrant and imprison him without a trial. This further aroused public anger and led to mass demonstration. The government resorted to lathi charge and even firing to stop the agitations. A country-wide protest was organized on 6 April 1919, which was observed as the National Humiliation Day. रोलैट एक्ट आया जिसके बाद और भी ज्यादा लोगों में आक्रोश भर गया था, क्योंकि इस एक्ट के अंडर में जो ब्रिटिशर्स हैं वो किसी को भी बिना वारंट के जेल में डाल सकते हैं, बिना किसी ट्रायल. तो जलियांवाला बाग मैसेकर 1990. हड़ताल्स एंड प्रोटेस्ट मीटिंग्स वर हेल्ड ऑल ओवर द कंट्री अपोजिंग द रोलेट एक्ट. On 6 April 1919, Gandhiji was arrested. This was followed by arrests of Dr. Satyapal and Dr. Saifuddin Kichliu in Punjab. On 19 April 1919, the peaceful gathering was attended by men, women and children. General Dyer, a British officer, stationed a regiment of soldiers at the only entrance of the park, declared the meeting illegal and ordered his soldier to open fire at the people. The firing lasted for 10 minutes till all the ammunition was exhausted. Close to 400 people were killed and thousands were wounded. जलियांवाला बाग मैसेकर जो था वो जलियांवाला बाग में अमृतसर में ही पीसफुल प्रोटेस्ट हो रहा था अलग अलग लोगों के प्रिजन के जाने की वजह से, लेकिन जनरल डायर ने बहुत सारे लोगों को वहां पर बुलाया, अपनी आर्मी को बुलाया और अंधाधुंध आर्मी जो फायरिंग है वो शुरू कर दी. द मैसेकर इन्फ्लेम्ड द एंगर ऑफ द इंडियंस. There were widespread protests. Rabindranath Tagore surrendered his knighthood in protest. The government declared martial law in Punjab and resorted to inhuman cruelties to stop the rising tide of protests. People were tortured and newspapers were banned. However, all this repression further strengthened people's determination to fight against oppression. और इस जलियांवाला बाग मैसेकर के बाद जब बहुत सारे लोग, औरतें, बच्चे, बुजुर्ग सब बहुत ज़्यादा भारी तादाद में मर चुके थे, इंडियंस में और भी ज़्यादा आक्रोश पैदा हो गया और अब इन लोगों को ब्रिटिशर्स के अगेंस्ट में लड़ाई करने का एक और ठोस वजह मिल चुकी थी. केस स्टडी. Khilafat movement 1920. The growing discontent against the British led to the launching of the Khilafat movement, which was organized by the Ali brothers, Muhammad Ali and Shaukat Ali, in protest against the injustices done to Turkey, which had fought against Britain after the First World War. Turkey was important to the Indian Muslims as the Sultan of Turkey was also the Caliph or Khalifa and was the head of the Muslims throughout the world. The Khilafat leaders put pressure on the British government to give better treatment to Turkey. Through this demand, Muslims were drawn into the national movement in large numbers. This movement became a part of the national movement. The Congress leaders joined the agitation and popularized it. उसके बाद खिलाफत मूवमेंट आया जो कि दो ब्रदर्स मोहम्मद अली एंड शौकत अली ने लीड करा था, जो खिलाफत यानी कि खालिफ थे टर्की के. उन्होंने ब्रिटिशर्स को फोर्स किया कि वो सारे मुस्लिम्स के लिए और टर्की के बेनिफिट के लिए कुछ न कुछ काम करें. Quick facts. Due to its features, the Rowlatt Act was infamously called as No Appeal, No Dalil, No Vakil Act. Indians hated this act so much that they called it the Black Act. जो Rowlatt Act था उसको No Appeal, No Dalil, No Vakil Act के नाम से भी जाना जाता था और इंडियंस को ये एक्ट बिल्कुल भी पसंद नहीं था, जिसकी वजह से इस एक्ट का नाम उन्होंने Black Act रख दिया था. Non-cooperation movement 1920 to 1922. Angered by the rigid attitude of the British, the Congress decided to start a non-cooperation movement under the leadership of Gandhiji. Gandhiji urged Indians not to cooperate with the British. The movement aimed at protesting against British repression in Punjab and their policy towards Turkey. It was also for the attainment of स्वराज. उसके बाद नॉन कोऑपरेशन मूवमेंट स्टार्ट हुआ, यानी कि स्वराज के लिए एक और मूवमेंट ला दिया गया, जिसके तहत जितनी भी गवर्नमेंट ऑफिसेज हैं, स्कूल्स हैं जो ब्रिटिश चला रहे हैं, उसमें ना ही कोई जाएगा और ना ही उनके गुड्स कोई भी खरीदेगा. कोई भी ब्रिटिशर्स के साथ कोऑपरेट नहीं करेगा. The movement was to be launched in stages. It started with the giving up of honorary titles received by the Indian from the British government. Gandhiji gave up the title of Kesari-e-Hind Medal. This was followed by the boycott of schools, colleges, law courts and elections to the legislatures. Educational institutions like the Jamia Millia Islamia at Aligarh later shifted to Delhi, and Kashi Vidyapeeth at Banaras were started by nationalist leaders. Foreign clothes were burnt and strikes and hartals were organized. Indians were asked not to pay taxes, not to work for the British and not to cooperate with the government. Non-cooperation movement stages में implement करा गया था. सबसे पहले जो भी आपको titles या फिर honors ब्रिटिशर्स के द्वारा दिए गए हैं उनको छोड़ दीजिए, रिनाउंस कर दीजिए. जितने भी इनके स्कूल्स हैं, इंस्टीट्यूशंस हैं, ऑफिसेज हैं, यूनिवर्सिटीज हैं, उस पे मत जाइए, इनके गुड्स को भी यूज मत करिए. होल सोल ब्रिटिशर्स के साथ कोई भी इंडियन कोऑपरेट नहीं करेगा. क्विक फैक्ट्स. Gandhiji's view on women was clear from his statement, if strength meant moral power, then women is immeasurably men's superior. If non-violence is the law of our being, the future is with women. तो स्टार्टिंग से ही औरतों को लेके महात्मा गांधी जी की यही राय थी कि अगर आपका मानना है कि नॉन वायलेंस ही के थ्रू ही हमें इंडिपेंडेंस मिल सकती है और वो सबसे ज़्यादा सुपीरियर है, तो औरतों से ज़्यादा कोई अच्छा इंसान इस चीज़ को लेकर नहीं हो सकता. Along with boycott and non-cooperation, a constructive program was also launched. It included the popularization of the charkha and khadi, promotion of Hindu-Muslim unity, abolition of untouchability, and the spread of education. Emphasis on these popular issues made the movement a mass movement. The movement was a great success. Thousands of people willingly went to jail. बॉयकॉट और नॉन कोऑपरेशन के साथ साथ खादी और चरखा का मूवमेंट भी स्टार्ट हो गया था. जो कपड़े हैं इंडिजिनसली बनाए जाने लगे, लोगों ने मासेस में पार्टिसिपेट करना शुरू कर दिया और लोग विलिंगली जेल में जाने के लिए भी तैयार थे. बट द नॉन कोऑपरेशन मूवमेंट केम टू एन अब्रप्ट एंड बिकॉज ऑफ अ वायलेंट इंसिडेंट एट Chauri Chaura in a police station 15 miles away from Gorakhpur in UP in 1922. There the police opened fire on a mob of Pleasant, exhausted its ammunition, and when the infuriated mob attacked the policemen, they found shelter in the Thana police post. The mob burned the Thana, which resulted in the death of 22 policemen inside the building. The news of the Chauri Chaura incident disturbed Gandhi and he suspended the non-cooperation movement. तो गांधी जी स्टार्टिंग से ही अहिंसा करना के थ्रू ही इंडिपेंडेंस चाहते थे, लेकिन चौरी चौरा मूवमेंट हुआ नॉन कोऑपरेशन की वजह से, जिसकी वजह से करीबन 22 पुलिसमैन की हत्या कर दी गई और इसी की वजह से जानकारी मिलते ही नॉन कोऑपरेशन मूवमेंट गांधी जी के द्वारा रद्द कर दिया गया. The national movement during these years turned into a popular movement largely due to the efforts of Gandhiji. The methods he advocated were so simple that even the common people could follow them. Despite being simple, these methods were so effective that the British had no answer to them. जो गांधी जी की पॉलिसीज थी वो इतनी सिंपल थी कि कोई भी उन्हें फॉलो कर सकता था. सिंपल थी लेकिन इतनी स्ट्रॉन्ग थी कि ब्रिटिशर्स के पास भी इनकी पॉलिसीज या सवालों का जवाब नहीं होता था. Recap. Many political associations were formed before the birth of the International Congress. A.O. Hume founded Indian National Congress in 1885 with W.C. Banerjee as its first president. The moderates dominated the Congress during its early years. Soon the extremists became powerful. In 1905, Bengal was divided into two. It was an attempt to break Hindu-Muslim unity and weaken the national movement. Partition of Bengal led to the start of the Swadeshi and boycott movement. People started boycotting British goods and wore only Indian-made clothes. The movement first started in Bengal and soon spread throughout India. Students and women played an active role in it. Encouraged by the British, the Muslim League was formed in 1906. A militant movement grew in the early years of the 20th century. Secret societies were formed whose members believed in the use of violence to overthrow British rule. The movement did not succeed. Mahatma Gandhi emerged as a national leader. He advocated the use of satyagraha to fight the British. His social agenda included the removal of untouchability, the revival of village crafts and the popularization of charkha and khadi. तो स्टूडेंट्स इस चैप्टर में हमने जाना कि आईएनसी की फॉर्मेशन से पहले काफ़ी सारी लोकल एसोसिएशंस फॉर्म हो चुकी थी. अलग अलग टाइम पे अलग अलग एसोसिएशंस फॉर्म हुई. अनटचेबिलिटी के अगेंस्ट, ब्रिटिशर्स के अगेंस्ट बहुत सारे मूवमेंट्स निकले और आखिरी में गांधी जी एक बहुत ही बड़े नेशनल लीडर की तरह सामने आए. स्टूडेंट्स, विद दिस वी कम टू द एंड ऑफ दिस चैप्टर. इसकी जितनी भी एक्सरसाइजेज आपको खुद से करनी है.